Hi again. Most people resist negative labels or negative interpretations that others may try to pin on them. Sometimes this is so successful that although these folks persist in deviance, they literally still consider themselves to be conformist. How exactly do they do it? Well, Skiles and Matza some years ago came up with what they referred to as techniques of neutralization. These are highlighted on pages 20 and 21 in your third study guide and in chapter 6 in your text. Think of these as allowing us to, in certain ways, neutralize the moral demands of everyday living. It has particular application to the model that we just studied, labeling. Remember again, that model argues that deviance is socially constructed or created, and it's concerned with how and why the label deviant is applied to some actions and some people, and how this devalued label might very well, or stigmatized label if you wish, how could it influence subsequent behavior? How can it influence how the people to which the label has been attached come to perceive or think of themselves? Bear in mind that Skiles and Matza picked up a lot of their information via their work with juvenile offenders. But let's look at each one of these techniques of neutralization. The first one, denial of responsibility. In a lot of ways, this one involves people getting very creative with the quote-unquote becauses. The person is a victim of circumstance, and he or she is pushed or pulled into a situation that is beyond his or her control. It's sort of, well, I'm a victim of the system, okay? Or it wasn't really my fault. I did what I did, but it was because of forces beyond my control. I didn't really want to do it, but she or he or they made me. Now, denial of injury. It's based sort of on the notion that the person supposes that his or her actions really didn't do any harm, and that the victim can afford any loss or any damage. Okay? It's sort of, what's the big deal? Shoplifters will sometimes say, once they're caught, well, I'll give it back. But this is sort of an idea that, again, who really got hurt? Sort of, well, okay, yeah, I did what I did, but these people got insurance. They'll get reimbursed. No big deal. Okay? Now, the denial of a victim, and then if you go on over to the next page of your study guide, page 21, condemnation of the condemners. I want you to think of these two as being, rather than defensive like the first two, these are offensive. Okay? So let's take a look quickly at denial of a victim. The deviant may view the act as not really being wrong. In other words, the victim deserves the injury. Or, well, there's not any real victim here. They had it coming. Okay? Or, as I've noted, they should have known better. In certain respects, the person using this technique may come to think of himself or herself as sort of a righteous avenger. So the self-concept of the person performing the deviant act is to a degree actually defended, supported by arguing that, well, they deserve what they got. Now, Condemnation of the condemners, over again on page 21 of your third study guide. It's really considering the people who are condemning me for doing this act, they're a bunch of damn hypocrites. They're acting out of personal spite. So literally, again, what the deviant does is sort of shift blame to others. And at the same time kind of reinforce the notion that, again, what they did was okay. When Skiles and Matza dealt with juvenile offenders, some of them would argue that, well, the cops are hassling me. Why would they be hassling me? They ought to be out busting real criminals. And everybody knows they're on the take. It's sort of like this. Just who are you to talk? Now, again, you ever been caught speeding? And you tell the officer who stops you, haven't you ever been in a hurry? Didn't you ever get a ticket in your life? Okay, so again, deviants may argue that, well, my parents cheat. Well, other adults that I know cheat. Just who are you to accuse me of anything? And then, last but not least, appeal to higher loyalties. Here, it's sort of like the rules of the larger society take a back seat to the loyalty one has to others that are important in his or her life. It's a little bit like the deviant claims that the law had to be ignored because there were more important issues at stake. My friends depended on me. What was I going to do? I've got to defend my way of life. So I ended up having to do what I had to do. Again, the emphasis is largely on loyalty to a cause or to a group. This is much more important than literally following the norms. If you go back to Durkheim's model of suicide that we discussed, deviance almost becomes an altruistic act for the good of the group or the cause. Now, these are really fascinating and applicable notions and ideas for you to consider. And there are some examples of this in real life situations. If you go back to the preceding page, this is page 20, take a look at this statement right here. If you're going to make it in the world, you have to backstab and cheat. Interestingly enough, this is a statement made by a student at a prestigious university in which he was defending his cheating. And likewise, students will sometimes make that, well, everybody I know cheats, so what's the big deal? Okay? Furthermore, this denial victim often employed by rapists. Well, they really wanted it. If they didn't want it, they wouldn't have been there in the first place. They shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have dressed that way. They shouldn't have behaved in that way. And then if you'll come over to, again, page 21, you'll notice this statement. Since you adults won't serve as an example to the young by being accountable for the truth, how can you expect kids to do anything else? Once again, a student at a prestigious university defending the fact that she was cheating. And on the other hand, some will make this argument. I'm talking about students who cheat. Look, a formal education is a means to an end. I'm entitled to get to the next level. So if I have to bend or even break some rules in order to get there, that's just the way it is. Once again, a defense for, in this particular case, cheating. Another example that you might consider, and I apologize for this small picture, are these young guys. Back in 1993, they were part of a group called the Spur Posse, white middle-class gang in Lakewood, California. And these boys allegedly raped young girls and adolescents for points. And after the members of the posse were charged with, get this, 10 counts of rape by intimidation, 4 counts of unlawful sexual intercourse, 1 count of forcible rape, 1 count of oral copulation, and 1 count of lewd conduct with a minor under the age of 14. An enormous amount of national attention followed. The prosecutors ended up dropping all but 1 charge after determining that most of the encounters were apparently consensual, although with underage girls, some as young as the age of 10. Now, the police had the opportunity to prosecute the older boys for statutory rape, but they didn't. So the boys and their families then made rounds on news and later tabloid TV shows. And what's quite interesting is that some of the responses highlighted these techniques of neutralization identified by Scholes and Matza. For example, one reoccurring theme when they appeared on talk shows and tabloid TV shows is that something or someone else was to blame for what took place. For example, on one show, a spur stated, the schools, they're handing out condoms and stuff like that. And like, if they're handing out condoms, why don't they tell us we get arrested for it? A father of one of the spurs commented, "Nothing my boy did was anything that any red-blooded American boy wouldn't do at his age." Another father made this comment, "What a society. They have these clinics, they have abortions, they don't have to tell their parents, the schools give out condoms. Gee whiz, what does that tell you?" Other parents made the argument that the girls were asking for it. They were being loose. And one father went as far as to use the age-old phrase, "Well, boys will be boys." Now, after the talk show circuit kind of dried up, it was interesting to note that the Spur Posse members were approached by various talent agencies trying to sell their story for a TV movie. When one agent asked if they were concerned about how they might be presented in a show, the members ended up responding that their only concern was, how much money are we going to make? So bear in mind that even though labels can be attached to people, there are ways by which, again, labels can be muted. For example, Bradley Wright highlights the fact that suppose you decide to cheat. Well, you could deny injury. You didn't cheat to hurt anybody. And if the professor is grading on a strict curve, then bumping up your test score won't change anybody else's score, so what's the harm? He also points out, well, you could blame the victim. If the professor hadn't made his or her test so confusing, so hard, so tricky, would you have had to cheat? Well, of course not. Or you could condemn the condemners. Everybody knows that members of the faculty and administration, they make this big case out of cheating, but we all know they cheat at their jobs. Or he could also point out that you could appeal to higher loyalties. Maybe you didn't really want to cheat, but as he points out, your parents are really counting on you. You are expected by them to graduate and get a good job, so you've got to have a good grade point average. Bear in mind again how all of us can mute negative labels that are attached. Until next time.